Well, hello, my dear saints and scholars. I'm coming to you from my back deck during a rainstorm to let you know, for our summary, that I began working on a book yesterday, which is probably not advisable since I'm still finishing up a book that editors are expecting and publishers are expecting. But I started it because I began my Father's Day by watching the Tom Hanks movie, Won't You Be My Neighbor, about a segment of the story of Mr. Rogers. Excuse me. And let me tell you, highly recommend. This beautiful man, Mr. Rogers, was, I don't know if many of you know this, but was actually a minister. And his Christian convictions inspired him to do a lot of the things he did, especially as it pertained, obviously, to working with children. So I don't want to dive into that, but I will straight up tell you that I think I think that movie made me cry. I'm going to say conservatively 6 times. But as I was feeling all the emotions and whatnot, and this beautiful, gentle soul, it inspired me to start writing down a few ideas that this was giving to me for a book. And I think I want to talk about Kim's emotions rule theology schools. I think that's good. I think that's a good way of sort of saying it, because the general tone of that whole group's discussion was digging into the role that emotion plays, which of course in the academy we tend to have this almost blind side when it comes to the relevance of emotions. I mean, even the most stoic, again to use a word in that discussion, person, it does experience emotions. Very few of us have ever really gotten to that stoic level of being unmoved by the emotions that either are created within ourselves or by the stimuli that we encounter in our daily lives, be it family, friends, just state of the world, especially in this day and age. And I think in some ways the questions I'm setting up to you give you a false dichotomy. So it's kind of forcing you to answer questions in ways that don't really apply, because of course our emotions play a part in it. And of course a lot of our faith is based on feelings, and there's genuine concern to be worried about that, to make sure that we don't let our emotions supersede our rational thoughts. And the list of ways in which that's gone horribly awry is very, very clear, not the least of which the stuff that we're looking at right now. Like, never forget the 400 years we've looked at African slavery in North America, specifically. I mean, the people who were slave holders and people who supported this were Christian, were devout Christian, and yet we're blinded to this because they could very easily say, like, it feels wrong. We see this ongoing prevalence and ubiquitousness of racism. I even had a conversation yesterday with a person who's a friend of mine who we had we come down on very different stances, which makes it awkward for a Father's Day thing. But that's the point right now, is these conversations have to be awkward and they must be forced, and we don't get to sit in silence, especially when you look like me. It is my time to really stand up and be verbal about this, and that was, like I said, it was an awkward conversation. But again, this is somebody who hasn't really reflected on why he thinks this way, is more going from the emotional base. So I say that because obviously there is a beauty of taking the both, of taking the emotion, but also what we're trying to deal with in this class and theology and all your classes is give you language and understandings. Because the word he felt like he should still be able to use, I'm sure you can probably fill in the gaps there, as like, it's just a sound. I'm like, yeah, they're all just sounds, but that word has a cultural context of profound oppression, profound subjugation to her people. So one, why do you want to say that word? And two, it's not just a sound. It's a sound that indicates a horrific element of our culture that we need to be adamantly and visibly and powerfully combating right now, especially as people of faith, which he is. And that really bummed me out. So this idea of emotion coming with our rationality is part of just our expression. It is the great rounded myriad thing that makes a human experience, is that we have this emotional capacity. And of course Christ reaches into us through our emotions. And as was brought out, we can look at Jesus weeping over the death of Lazarus, but also when, remember the gospel writers talk about when Jesus sees the people and he is like, wounded is not, he is pained in his stomach because they're like sheep without a shepherd. Like there's a powerful emotional motivator that Jesus would use to drive forward his understandings and his teachings about the kingdom of God, and ultimately his sacrifice on behalf of those shepherdless sheep, which brings in the fullness of the kingdom of God. So we're looking at people like, if you're in History 1, Julian of Norwich, who has this incredible mystical vision during the time of the 100 Years' War, during the time of bubonic plague, during a time of profound suffering, where the dominant theology is that God is punishing us for being wayward humanity. A theology that, as you looked around, made perfect sense. It's war, famine, pestilence. Like it's the biblical trifecta. But then she has this mystical, emotional journey and sees Christ as not inflicting this upon us, but suffering within us. And then spends the next 2 decades building a theology around that we still have and can still learn from to this day. John Wesley's, heart strangely warmed begins, especially for the North American, the Western context, the evangelical movement, not just of Methodism, but of all sorts of groups that would consider themselves evangelical. And of course, it comes from an emotive place, but then he spends his life building on that with rationality to the point where Wesley's famous quadrilateral, slow down, includes reason as part of the 4 major points of what it is that we need in order to fully comprehend not just the Bible, but our own role and what it is that we're called to do. Is that he's wounded internally for the poor, but his understanding of Christ comes from a very emotional place. So you're right, our emotions have a very integral role. It's how God can speak to us and touch us, I think is the word there. To touch us in ways that simple words, laws, regulations, all these things simply cannot do. But to just go for emotion and not actually take the time to dig in and understand, 1, some of the mistakes that our brothers and sisters in the faith have made, 2, some of the language and successes they found to help us explore that. This all takes our emotions from a purely just feeling that's internal and helps us to take that internal feeling and express it in a multiplicity of different ways to those who may also benefit from it. So as we're going to go forward into this, as we look at somebody like William Wilberforce and his emotional encounters that would help him be the agent for the abolition of slavery, I don't think I'm saying anything to you that you don't already know, don't already understand, is that your emotions in our context now are some of the best ways that Jesus can talk to us. As a man, I came from a family where tears were not seen to be overly masculine, and I'm very happy, as I mentioned at the beginning of this reflection, that that's not something I carry with me anymore. It's something I'm passing on to my sons. It's a way to remove the toxic masculinity of emotions that men can feel: mad, glad, sad. And when you feel sad, you want to get to mad as quickly as possible, and that's man emotions. Of course it's not. That's ridiculous. The shortest verse in the Bible is 2 words: Jesus wept. Good enough for Jesus, good enough for me. And that was a tough, deep brother. That was a powerful, strong man. So some of the most balanced people we're going to find are the people who are very willing to, in their faith, dive into their emotions. It's the deep valley of the shadow of death. But remember what the psalmist says, what I believe it was David who wrote that, even in that dark, deep valley, even under the ocean, you are with me. The highest peaks, the lowest valleys, you are with me. And that is a profound theological reminder that wherever we go in our emotions, and I know people have emotions that can run away with you. There's people that have a variety of mental and emotional illnesses that make the very, very extreme. But those people have also been all throughout Christianity. Maybe they weren't diagnosed, obviously, but they've been all throughout Christianity, and they've contributed some of the most beautiful and powerful and longest lasting teachings that we still benefit and are blessed by. Cold rationality, 1, I don't think truly exists, but 2, has never really brought about actual change. Like if we look at somebody like Augustine, keep in mind the beginning again of his journey comes from his deep emotional wrenching. Same goes of Martin Luther, same goes of Zwingli, same goes of Calvin. they have these moments, as the great hymn Amazing Grace talks about, that it's grace that convicts us, but it's also grace that sets us free. Both things are an operation of God's grace, is that the feelings, good and what we may refer to as negative, can be the most powerful things that God gives to us. And how we can reflect on that in ways that are beneficial, not only to our own mental and emotional health, but to be able to communicate the gospel, is to have the language and the teachings of others to allow us to be able to step back, observe even our own feelings, and then find great language and great actions to communicate those. So again, another great week of discussions. A little bit later on this week, you'll be getting your discussion forum grades in. You should have back your first assignment from Taylor Murray. If you haven't received anything, it's because he didn't receive it, so you need to get on that right away. That's about it for housekeeping, but here we are. We're flying into to week 8 of our semester. Can you believe it? We're 3/4 of the way through. Is that right? I think that's right. It was a very good Father's Day, and I'm still very, very tired, so I apologize for this video coming in late as well. All right, so there will not be office hours this week. There will be office hours next week. But if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to fire off an email. And keep feeling your feelings. It's the gift that God has given to us. It's not to be negated. It's not to be minimized. They're not to overpower us, but they are definitely there to motivate us. And I would argue it's probably the most powerful way that God can communicate to us, is just to get us in that wounded gut feeling as we look at a world very much still full of sheep without shepherds, and as we feel our own times when we feel very shepherdless. But it's our teaching and it's our theology to remind us, even when we don't feel God's presence, that is a very integral part of faith, is to take our mind, in our mind, say like, no, I may not feel God, but I believe and I hope and I have faith that God remains with me. All right, my dear saints and scholars, let's continue to look at some more very world-shattering revolutions. All these topics, I hope you're feeling, land with an even greater weight right now, given how our world is currently going. And I hope it's a blessing to you that the world has been in times of profound social upheaval. And when we're smart, when we're wise, when we're compassionate, and when we're full of love, those upheavals don't just become revolutions, they become absolutely revolutionary in how humans operate going forward. And I truly hope this is a time where we can see the beginning of the end of the profound racism that has just been the blanket over top of so many of our brothers and sisters' lived experiences. And whether or not that is your experience, or whether you're like me and have been mercifully spared from this and have the privilege of checking in and checking out whenever I see fit and whenever you see fit, let us be aware of the fact that this is the voice of God coming through the streets saying, enough, absolutely enough. 400 years. Don't brush past the fact that it was the Israelites were in slavery for 400 years when God raised up Moses and said, I have heard the cries of my people. I mean, I think we're living through something as powerful and biblical as that right now. So may your emotions and your intellect guide you to stomach pain and to words of freedom and to actions that let others be free. And at the very least, stay out of the way. And as always, learn and listen. All right, saints and scholars, let's dig into another time of revolution.